Welcome back, everyone. So, thank you for being here today. Thank you to our wonderful panelists as we've having this rich conversation. Just to get through some of really the important components as we transition to talking about solutions. Now, we've talked about really defining at-risk youth. We've talked about really deconstructing the term, what it means, the implications it can have, the alternative terms that are being utilized. We've talked about some of the systems in place that really disenfranchise our young people. And so now we want to really talk about potential solutions. We want to brainstorm solutions because, of course, that is one of the most critical components for going from um, defining and identifying problems to identifying the solutions. Oftentimes in our community and our society, we can talk about the problems all day long, but we necessarily haven't identified and talked about the solutions. So I want to really unpack what it can mean, what some of these solutions can be, even as we think about this, and even just how do we move from awareness to action as well. So just to start off with our panelists, what what are some of these solutions? I'm going to ask you generally. What are some successful interventions? What are some solutions you think that we, as a society, as countries, as educational institutions, can put into place to really help and to support our young people?
Okay, again, I always like to be first off the block. Okay, so again, that's a wonderful question. Somewhat loaded, but a wonderful question. So, in order to give everybody time to talk, but I just want to say one thing before. There are little sayings that I like that I hold on to, such which has guide and direct my thoughts. So, like for me, it's things like hurt people, hurt people. As Ms. Gray, as you said, it's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you. So I just want to say that's now mine also, so I'll be using it anywhere I go, because I think it's very insightful and it speaks to the heart of what we're talking about here. Okay, having said that, it is Ms. Richards in the chat put in that there is no on-the-job training for teachers. So for me, basically, I like to count them out. The first thing is the level of individuals who we have who want to be teachers, I question in many cases. All right, and I've taught in at least 8 territories. So it's no longer a vocation, it's something people do when they can't do nothing else. That's the first thing. Second thing is, even for those of us who are dedicated teachers who know we have a curriculum but also care about humanity, human beings, and human rights, we need to know that we are doing this without much assistance from the system. Good, so let's pack that aside. So the third point now is, okay, how do we do better at what we do when we're looking for solutions? One is, I believe in, and I've seen this in a couple of places I've taught, even among the indigenous people, where we make the teachers part of the community. So in the urban areas, you may want to talk about on-the-job training, where people understand that there are cultural differences, racial differences, religious differences, all those things happening. But you need to be immersed in the community in order for them to trust you. You see, without community trust or without trust in the classroom, half of what you're doing will come to nothing. So, let me just start there to start off the conversation. And therefore, so I'm saying we're looking at trust in the classroom, trust in the community. We're looking at people being involved in those communities. In the urban centers, it can be on-the-job training. But in the more rural centers, it can be living in the communities, which I think helps because there's a disconnect between a lot of times the socioeconomic or other cultural factors of the teacher and those in the classroom, and therefore we have serious problems bridging the gaps. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. You are so right about that. That trust is critical. Even in the therapeutic relationship we talk about for counseling, we talk about how critical building rapport and building trust is. And that is what, regardless of what we do as a profession, when you're working with human beings, that is very, very critical. Now, Dr. Phillips, I promised to come back to you from previously, and I don't know if you want to jump in on this particular conversation and also go back to what you wanted to say previously.
Yes, I will connect what I wanted to say to this conversation because I think Dr. Anatole has really pinpointed some of what I wanted to say. So I appreciated listening to the audience members' questions about pinpointing how we can assess young people or youth and them being troubled. But as the conversation developed and evolved, and I heard it from some of us, I recognize that we may not have the formal training to identify the latent issues that are causing young people to youth to act out, or young adults in my case, since I really teach adults and young adults who might be at risk in terms of the academic setting. I do think that teachers still can recognize warning signs. So if a student is not, and this is for my adults, young people in their 20s, if you aren't coming to class, if you're not submitting your work on time, it takes another level of awareness, maybe a sixth sense. We say women have a sixth sense. Teachers need to have a sixth sense, and paying attention to where we might be losing our students. And often I end up, I make no assumptions, like, everybody has different rules around particular things. But if a student is continuously late, I make no assumptions and I don't automatically downgrade. I reach out and say, hey, I see that you haven't been submitting your work. I hope everything is okay. And if not, please reach out to me so that we can begin to address in some ways why things are not, rolling along like they should be. And often when I do that for adults, often when I do that, that does open the door to say, Dr. Phillips, this is what's going on in my life. And I suspect that that is the same for young people. It does require, though, going outside of our regular teaching time, because there's a lot on educators. There are institutional demands, like you have to get your students, and I think that's globally. That's not just the United States. That's around the world. There are institutional demands. You have to finish your curriculum, and get your students to a particular place by a particular time. And so your focus really does need to be on teaching. It really can't be on teaching, being a psychologist, being, a mental health provider, being a community development, provider, so on and so forth. And so as I was listening, I was also concerned. We may not have the training, but then if we did have the training, would we be taking on too much? And then that's where what Dr. Anatole just said comes in that educators need to be part of networks, community networks, institutions that they teach at need to create public-private partnerships that would deliver or help to deliver the resources that are needed. On a smaller level, mentorship programs are very helpful. I think that Natasha has me on here. I was her professor because one of the most life-changing things that happened for me when I was training as a seminarian was to be able to see a partnership come together before my very eyes in my 20s around at-risk youth in the Boston area, called the 10-Point Coalition. And the 10-Point Coalition grew out of the gang violence that was happening in the Boston area, and specifically gang warfare that broke out at a funeral in a church. And as a result, the ecumenical clergy created a coalition to address or created an organization that then developed into a coalition of public, private, government, local partnerships with the police to address the gang violence problem. But what I learned from that is that when we're dealing with at-risk youth, since we have already said that that's such a huge term, we can't just do it as a siloed entity as educators. It must be done. It must be done, and the issues must be addressed in partnership.
Very true, Dr. Phillips. Thank you. And I see we have a number of our panelists have their hands raised. So if you want to go ahead and jump in, feel free. I know we probably all have a lot to say about, potential solutions and interventions. So go for it. I see Dr. Sasha's hand. If you want to go ahead, and then Keisha,
Dr.
thank
Sasha,
you.
sorry, Dr. Sasha, if I may break protocol for a moment, Ms. Gray, I just want to say something that Dr. Phillips talked about, and I want to support it because I spent some time looking at your ceasefire program in Chicago, where they actually look at, the at-risk people as a part of a mental health problem. So just to support what you're saying, and it was really insightful to see how they intertwine the teachers, the coaches, the mentors into the communities, and they actually it was just a wonderful experience. I just want to support what you're saying.
Yeah, Dr. Anto, is funny because my neighbor was one of the leading people for the ceasefire here in Chicago.
Oh,
So
okay,
it's funny that you could connect that.
but again, just very quickly, again, you all talk about cable. I'm also a cable from back in the day, but also we've then imported here under Project Reason. I ran a program here for 3 years in inner cities in 72 communities based on the ceasefire program, which deals with this community basis thing. So just wanted to say that again, Dr. Phillips, thanks a lot for that.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, go ahead, Dr. Sasha, and
I
then we
wanted
go.
I wanted to really support what Dr. Phillips was saying, and I think as we think about solutions, we have the interpersonal solutions, right, that require us to kind of change on a one-on-one level what we are doing day to day, and a lot of that is going to have to deal with, thinking about workload, but also thinking about mindset, as I think you mentioned, and one of our attendees and participants also said if you have some teachers that might take an active interest in a particular child and then they go all out of their way for that child, but I think it's this mindset of recognizing that even as we are overworked as educators, the behavioral aspect of things must be a consideration. We have to think of that. But I also wanted to look from an institutional level. And I think that's what Dr. Anatol was kind of pointing to some of the things. One of the things, my husband works with foster youth. And one of the programs they developed in Sacramento that I think is just amazing is this idea of a culture broker. Because as you all know, the black and brown people we lose our kids at a much faster rate because of racism and all of the isms than other groups. And so they brought in culture brokers who actually work with parents to almost translate the law in a way that they can understand so that there is less of a likelihood that they will lose their kids because you have someone who is black who's telling you, listen, you cannot roll up in the court looking like that. You have to put on, right? I mean, and really speaking to them in ways that they understand and translating the law. And I think a program like that in the schools with between the teachers and the parents or even in, and I'm thinking about it now, and as I'm talking to you, I'm going to talk to my colleague who's the dean of the education school here because Stan State, we educate probably a dominance of a majority of the educators and teachers in Northern California come out of my university. And I'm just thinking of a culture broker program where we have someone coming into the classrooms to teach these teachers, listen, when you're dealing with black and brown kids, these are some of the things that you're going to have to be able to speak to parents about and no one understand the language because sometimes teachers are scared to have these conversations. They don't know the words to use. They don't know how to really break that barrier between themselves and parents of at-risk youth. And I saw this video, and I'm going to end with that, is where this gentleman who was in prison said he's a traumatized child who was parented by a traumatized child, right? And the systems here, and I know I dealt with it with my daughter. We have a higher rate of suspending black and brown kids, a higher rate of expelling black and brown kids. Where I'm in Sacramento is some of the highest rates in California and the US. And then what happens is when they suspend them a lot, then they end up getting expelled. They expel them out of the district. They end up in a one school. And if you look at that pipeline and that connection between one schools and prison, it is very, very high. All of the people, we have a rebound program in at the Cal State system where we bring students who have been incarcerated, and 30, almost everyone has been in a one school. So you tell me why we still have in one schools when we know that a one school is leading directly to prison, right? So I think thinking about a culture broker from an education standpoint, I think is a possible solution. And if you're not familiar with the program, you could look at it. It started off in Fresno, and it has really been successful. I think it's making its way around the U.S. It's prominent in the foster care system, but I think there are tons of applications to other institutions and in particular education. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Thank you, Dr. Sasha. That the culture broker contour room, I don't know if you've ever heard of a concept called the hidden curriculum. And it's what I talk about it often because even coming to the US as an international student, you realize that whether you're from a subculture international student, there's certain given cultures within the classroom that you don't necessarily understand until maybe you're negatively impacted by it, right? So there's this hidden curriculum about how, for example, as you said, what are the rules, the unspoken rules in terms of even how you speak or what you say, or just coming from UE here to the US and learning, okay, you're going to get penalized negatively if you show up late. While at UE, they really didn't care. I say we show up at class supposed to start at 9. We show up between 9 and 9:15, and teachers show up at 9:15, and that was okay. But learning here that that is not a thing, right? So all of those pieces, you're right. Having that culture broker, because there's also this cultural difference that really negatively impacts our kids. So I really like that idea. Thank you. Okay, Dr. Kanisha. Oh, Keisha, go ahead, and then Dr. Kanisha.
Good morning, everyone. I'm from Jamaica and I teach in a rural school area. And what we do at our school, we try to build trust with our students and we have an open door policy for the parents. They're able to come in, speak to the guidance counselor, tell whatever is happening. And I'm going to give you a situation. I have a student recently. I noticed his grades were falling and he was sleeping in class and I was wondering what was wrong. And so I asked him, and he didn't want to say anything. I reached out to the mom. I know she was abroad, she was working. So he was actually staying with his grandparent. And when I spoke to the mom, I told her what is happening, and I didn't like it. And she started to cry, and I said, "What is it?" And then after, I said to her, "I'll speak to you after work." And then when I got home, I spoke to her and she was telling me all the situations that was happening with the child. So what I did, I made some recommendations and I went back to school and I spoke to the counselor. And so she's able to have a little counseling session with the child along with the grandparent. Also, we have a mentorship program where we have persons coming in from the community to speak to the boys, especially. They're the ones who are really the ones who are only at risk. They're the ones who don't really care. If you say something to some of them, they're already saying, okay, this is what you think of me, so this is the path I'm taking. But as an educator, I always try to reach out to my students, their family, try to build a relationship with them, one that is filled with trust. And also, I try to track my students, and we try to do these in our school. Thank you.
I'll just jump in then, Shayna. Is that okay? Okay. So I'm realizing that there is a sort of crossover in terms of the themes from different levels. So in terms of school, further education, higher education, early education, and so on. So, in terms of interventions, yes, there are early intervention programs, and in the UK we have like, for example, Nuffield Early Language Intervention, and they've demonstrated some positive impact in terms of disadvantaged children improving language skills and school readiness. But what I wanted to really highlight in terms of what I've been hearing in the conversations is the matters around staff. And in universities in the UK, we have the same problems in terms of we know that we will get students coming in with A levels, B Tech, etc., coming into the university with really good grades. And regardless of that, across the UK, we have what we call the BAME attainment gap or BAME awarding gap. And BAME stands for Black, Asian, and minoritized ethnic people. So this BAME awarding gap or attainment gap is linked to the fact that Black and Asian students and minoritized students are more likely to leave university with a lower class degree. So they come in with good grades, but in their journey through the education system, they underperform. And these are adults. So we know it's something to do with society broadly. And our university and other universities across the UK have acknowledged that there are institutional factors that put up barriers for BAME students. And they've come up with interventions around, making the curriculum more inclusive. So academic staff are told you are going to have to make the time to understand how the way in which you design your curriculum impacts student engagement, impacts student attainment, impacts student just their experience in the classroom. Also looking at peer and, I mean, peer-to-peer relationship, how you are facilitating that in the classroom, because we know in a multicultural society like England, we have classrooms where all the Chinese students are sitting together, all the Asian students are sitting together, all the African students are sitting together. And I will make a point of duty to come in the classroom and say, hello, I know you're going to go for what feels comfortable. We are humans. If I see a Jamaican, I'm going to make a beeline to the Jamaicans. That's just who we are, but it's not going to help you. So I'm going to mix you up randomly and I'll just go and I'll just shift up the classroom. But not all academics do that. And so we've had to put that in the training to say, these are the things you have to do. You have to force students to integrate. You have to force academic staff to decolonize the curriculum, inclusivize the curriculum, and be very, very vigilant in terms of looking out for students who are disengaging because of the cultural distance. Sometimes these are students who they're the first in their family to attend university. And they've done really well to get into university, meaning they've achieved their A levels and so on. And now we're putting them at risk of not getting a good degree and therefore leaving university with a 2-2 or a lower, quality degree. And then they're fighting to find good jobs because if you don't get a first class honors in the UK, trust me, it's very hard unless you're coming from Oxford or Cambridge. You need to be getting a first class or a 2-1 degree. And so we've been implementing interventions that focus on the systems that we have in place and how they're protecting students and ensuring that they do not face certain barriers as they come through the journey in higher education. And one last example, I know I'm talking a lot, but during the pandemic, for example, and this is one example that made staff stop and realize that there are institutional factors that impact attainment. So during the pandemic, we had a non-detriment policy, and the non-detriment policy meant that students would automatically get an extension for their assignments. So they didn't have to go and apply, they didn't have to go and explain anything to any teacher. Once they said they needed an extension, they got it, right? And that blanket rule and also assessment strategies were modified because of online assessments, etc. So we saw how changes to our assessment strategy, changes to extenuating circumstances policy positively closed So positively impacted student attainment by closing the BAME awarding gap. So we know that when we change policies, when we change our own strategies, it impacts students positively. So it's not just about mentoring the students and, oh, maybe, it's because they're working while studying and they're not balancing their time. No, what can we do in terms of our timetabling policy, in terms of our extenuating circumstances policy, in terms of their awareness of all these policies? So that's the example I'm trying to give, that even in higher education, focusing on a systemic approach in terms of the interventions have been very impactful.
Thank you, Dr. Linton Williams. I'm sure we can have a whole other session on what it means to decolonize the systems and education and so on. I am really just curious as to, did your institution maintain those policies from the pandemic? Because the pandemic did teach us that we can be more inclusive and that we can be flexible and bring and change a lot. But I've found that many institutions are reverting back to their old policies. So did your institution continue to implement those policies, their
They revert,
changes?
they went
Mm.
straight back to pre-pandemic policy, and then the awarding gap widened worse than before the pandemic. So we know that, okay, these 2 years we closed the gap, and as soon as we go back to our previous practices, the gap has widened again. So obviously, so actually now this academic year, the institution has just implemented a new extenuating circumstances policy and some new quality assurance policies based on them realizing what had happened post-COVID. Well, post-COVID, if you want to call this period post-COVID. So they are aware of the data. So they know that there's a difference in terms of pre-pandemic awarding gap, during the pandemic, and after the sort of policy changes that we implemented. So now they're trying to find a middle ground. So they're implementing new policies now, and we don't have the data to see what the impact is. We'll have that data in October to see if the new kind of, not as radical as the pandemic period, but they've modified it a little bit to allow some flexibility for students. And we're going to see if that has an impact or not.
Thank you.
So I teach at the middle school level, and I just wanted to just share a few strategies that we use to help at-risk kids or kids who are struggling in school. So one thing that we do each week, we give students a social emotional lesson. So that lesson is designed to teach students empathy, help them with self-awareness, help to build their social skills so that they feel a sense of belonging in school. They feel engaged and they want to stay in school and they want to do well. They want to be successful. Okay, another strategy that we use. We provide students with after school support. So we track the students and we see if they have missing assignments in their classes, and then those students who are failing with those who have a lot of missing assignments, what we have them do, we have them stay after school and they work with their teachers and to help bring their grades up. Another thing that we do, we provide students with laptops because we know that some students do not have access to technology. So we give them a laptop if they, so each student is provided with a laptop, but we also have a designated class laptop. So if they forgot their laptop that day, they have access to technology and they're still able to do their work. What else do we do? We track attendance of students. Um, so what we do, we if we notice that a student has been absent, maybe for 1 or 2 classes, we reach out to the parent, ask what's going on. And if we notice that it's still an issue, we reach out to our guidance counselors And we have deans who track attendance. So we focus on teaching, but as a teacher, we are still in the classroom. We observe our student. We know if they're sleeping. We know if they're coming to school late. And yeah, we can reach out to the parent. But if we notice there's probably more to it. There are guidance counselors in the school that we can reach out to. There are people there to help us. So those are some of the things that we actually do at the middle school level to help our students.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like very helpful interventions there for our students.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Natasha, if you want to go ahead with the audience comments, and then we will get any closing comments from our panelists before we wrap up today. I know we could go on for hours, and perhaps, Natasha, I'm going to tell you now, we might need a part two of this later on. But if you want to give us our audience comments and then some of our concluding remarks from our panelists.
Yes, so I have, and very briefly for everybody, please, because we're over the time, but I have the lineup of first Maurice, then Jessica, then Reverend Millen, and then Lorna Edwards. So in that order, Maurice, then Jessica, Reverend Millen, then Lorna.
Thanks, Natasha, and thanks everyone. This has been a stimulating discussion. Congratulations to you all. Just very quickly, to touch on your start of definition of at risk, and to recognize that of course it covers a myriad of let's say issues, difficulties, challenges. I think the biggest challenge for us in Jamaica, and I'm from Jamaica, is financial. It looms large. And I think that, and I've said it in the chat, that just having trusted guidance counselors, because you as a teacher, an educator, you can't be all things for all students. You're trying to reach the vast majority that you can. We may not be able to save everyone, but just having that trust and that that um that 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 background where you are as a guidance counselor, psychology background where you can understand behavior patterns and so on to reach those students. For me, in my experience, the biggest risk that and I've taught at the tertiary level only, at the Normal and in law school, the biggest risk I've seen for younger people though has to do with for men, for boys, being being recruited into gangs or into groups of where there's deviant and antisocial behavior. And so I wondered whether or not there were any ideas, and maybe we need it for part two as to how to reach that cohort, because certainly in the Caribbean, that's one of the biggest risks that is involved, getting young men away from those influences that would want to lead them into crime, as opposed to staying on the straight and narrow. But thank you, everyone, and good luck with part two because I know it's coming. Thank you.
Madam Chair, if I may, thanks a lot for that, Mitya. You touched the spot there, and you're right. You're trying to encourage a part two. So I would invite you to be a part of the panel next time if you're going to be useful. Okay, just want to throw that out there.
Thank you, Dr. Marlin. Originally, I was to be part of the panel, and then our founder transitioned me to facilitator. So thank you. Okay, Natasha, who's next for comment?
Jessica.
So my name is Jessica Gist. I work with the PTA. I'm a PTA president in the Georgia school systems here in the U.S. And so we did just finish our first week back to school. And as the PTA president and being up there to, help the school with the back to school transition and everything, I noticed that our parents don't realize that their actions affect their children throughout their school day, and for them to have a great day. So as a advocate for the children and parents and the schools, what can I do, or what can my organization do for as far as on the elementary school level, what can we do to educate our parents about what they can do to improve their kids, because we have had parents come up there and threaten our teachers staff. We have had parents come up there and try to fight other parents. And then we have had parents that are complaining about everything but not giving a resolution. So I'm trying to be like that, I guess you could say, that middle person between the school and the parents, so that we can come to a common ground for the children.
Thanks, Jessica. And the panelists could answer that when they're answering finally, but we'll just take Reverend Millen and Lorna Edwards and then back to the panel to answer those questions. Reverend Millen,
Thank you so much. This has been an awesome webinar. I am trusting that there will not just be a part 2, but this might be an opportunity for the GGFF to, as we talk about finding solutions, to set in motion something that can create a non-cost forum for teachers that we are able to reach. But I want to say briefly, I mean, well, I sat here and I figured that it would be best for me to keep quiet. With so many educators, they would be better able to address the matter. But my input here is to say our number one focus should be to minister to the human core. Ministry to the human core. And as we see to minister to the human core, well, from a biblical perspective, we might say ministry to the human soul. It's a matter of seeking to reach these youngsters at their core. And there are 3 questions that would stimulate my thoughts and that I'd like to leave with us as we seek to minister to the human core. If we are able to address these 3 questions, I believe, despite our limitations, we will begin to see some significant turnaround as we seek to reach those who refer to us, whether we use the word at risk or underserved or whatever term. The first one really is helping these persons to understand at the core, who am I? Because we could have all the resources in the world and make them available to these youngsters. If they do not know at the core, who really am I? All the resources are just going to be like water on a duck's back. And then the other question is, really, why am I here? Oh, this business of life, what is it all about? Okay, so some say I'm at risk. Am I really at risk? What am I at risk? What am I at risk for? So why am I here? If I understand my purpose or my mission in life, then the next question is, what can I do with what I have? The biggest problem I think we have as humans is we tend so many times to focus on what we do not have. And because we are so obsessed with what we do not have, we fail to appreciate what we have. I'll give a little brief testimony here. I grew up in a little 10 by 10 room with 9 of us as brothers and sisters. And there were times when my mom was catering for 20 odd persons on a daily basis, cooking, washing, cleaning, disciplining. But we never knew the word poverty. We never knew the concept of being at risk. Because one of the things that she always do is to help us to understand, 1, you are not worse than anybody. And 2, you are not better than anybody. So at the core, it's who you are. You might not have as much things as some people do, but they are not better than you at the core. You might have more than some people do, but you are not better than them at the core. So if we are able to help from a spiritual perspective to minister to person at the core of their being, then a lot of the risk that we think they are facing, they will see these no more as risk, but as opportunity to excel and to overcome their limitation and be a model for others who are like them in their own context.
Thank you so much, Reverend Millen. Last person, Lorna Edwards.
Thank you. This is a very inspirational session. I see two things that I believe could enhance what's occurring in the cultural and educational space right now, whether it be from primary up to tertiary. One, respect at the core. If we see each person and respect them, a lot of what we have discussed here, looking at the children or even the adults and seeing how they look, how they dress, whether they are late or early, all of these factors. If we respect them at the core, then we will look at them through different lenses. We also know that nutrition is very important. How many of the teachers or educators are looking at the students and basically trying to see, are these persons properly nourished? If you're not nourished, you cannot learn, you cannot think straight. And if you don't do that, right then and there, you as an educator is actually going to start documenting things that will actually put them through the whole system as it is, whether it be cultural, racial, whatever, because all of these other factors are there. All you need to do is to tick them off. And then they go down. Eventually, you hear about mental illness. That's a grave aspect that's occurring globally, and we must be cognizant of that. Well, we have already heard about finances. Yes, it does affect. And every teacher, you need to also look at the fact that I know it's my money, but what can I do to help that student? I know it's not part of what you're taught, but think about it. It can do a whole lot. Even if it means a small amount, you're going to invest in that student. And as Reverend Millen talked about the religious aspect, there is so much I see in this, but you're on the right path. But remember, respect, respect. If I look at the student and the first person that he feels me, he knows that I'm accepted, at least that will throw off a whole lot. From I come and I know you accept me, irrespective of how I look and feel, I'm on the path with you. It's much easier to deal with somebody. So I hope that little bit will give you some great insight. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorna. Thank you, Reverend Millen. I think of two quotes, Dr. Marline, like quotes too. One is, children and anybody don't care what you know until they know that you care. And then there's another one here that says, belief is contagious. When teachers believe in students, students begin to believe in themselves. So at the core, really, even as we seek to teach specific curriculum, it is really worth the time to invest and get to know our students, because then we lay the foundation for them to learn. Without them feeling safe and loved and cared for, even within the classroom setting, they aren't going to learn as much as we try to impart knowledge upon them. Now, any final comments from our panel? I know we're way over time, so if anybody has any pressing one or two comments from panelists, and then we'll wrap up. Perhaps we'll have a book in the future or less, or a teaching class in the future, because this is so rich, but for right now, we'll just wrap up. So any final thoughts or comments?
Yes, I'm glad you touched on the point of believing in the children, because where I teach at Beulah Primary, that's what we have been doing, believing that each child can And for those children that are at risk and basically for the for academics, what has been done is that we have pulled them out of the regular class system and placed them in a group where they feel safe and in an environment where they can, explore and where they can develop. And we have seen improvement in that. Yes, we are lacking in resources, limited resources, but yes, because of the intervention, our children are excelling, and we are happy for the administration who have thought of this. My principal, Mrs. Little, I think she's on, and we're just doing an excellent job where that is concerned.
Thank you. And one last thought from anyone, and then Natasha, I'll ask you to put back up that screen where we want to ask people to give again to the foundation. So any last final comments? And then
I think
if
Dr.
not,
said something, I think perhaps Dr. Williams, and then I'll put it up.
okay, sounds good.
So I'll make this very quick. I won't go deeply into it. I just wanted to touch on the questions that were asked by the participants, as well as to say I wholeheartedly agree with Bishop Millen in terms of instilling purpose in children. And because if they don't have purpose, they grow up as adults without purpose. But I also want to, I recognize, so my parents are West Indians. I was born they're Jamaican. I was born in the States and have been heavily involved in the church from the time that I was young. And I recognize the development of the Black church in the States is different than the Caribbean, and maybe the continent, maybe Africa. And so I also want to challenge the church in the West Indies you have the resources in terms of who come to your churches. What I see in American churches is that what is happening in society also can be reinforced and reflected in the church. And so instilling purpose is also about representation. Young people need to see their doctors, they need to see their lawyers, they need to see their hairstylists, they need to see their business owners. So programmatically, there can be programs that happen in the church that either address the deficits that are happening socially or reinforce the advocacy that's happening in society. So that's one thing. And that goes to this comment on purpose. Purpose is instilled spiritually by faith, but also structurally. We need to see what we want to be. And then with respect to what Jessica has asked in terms of the PTA question, you can't do it by yourself, Jessica. I think hopefully what you've gotten here is that and a possible idea is to create or to have a meeting beyond whether it be on Zoom or in person, and bring some experts in, psychological, social, etc., to talk about maybe the relationship between parents and children, to begin to kind of address some of the issues and the challenges that you're having. You can't do it alone. And one of the things that I recognize and have recognized, you must know your limitations personally and professionally. I don't know everything, but guess what? I know who to go to help me when I don't know what I know that I don't know. So that's what I would say to you. Have some type of meeting where you can bring in professionals who can talk about the psychosocial development of children and the impact of family structure and culture i.e. also parents on that relationship. And then the last thing that I wanted to address was the gentleman who asked about
Gang.
the young
Gangs.
boys, the young boys. And you know, I keep saying resources beyond. And so at my home church, and they had written grant money to create a program for at-risk young girls and at-risk young boys. And the head of the grant monies were used for the young girls to create a writing program. And then for the young boys, the two leaders, one was an ex-gang member who was actually the head of the gang, who ended up, you know, interacting with clergy, so on and so forth, and ended up in the church. And so he was familiar with being what it meant to be at risk. And so he ended up being one of the leaders. And then the other leader was a minister in our congregation who had an MSW. And so weekly they would meet with the young men where they would talk about their realities. Part of the being at risk and helping young people is also recognizing their realities and helping them to articulate their realities. So if there are ways to create programming and bring in people and voices who can help to shape this next generation, I think that would be helpful for addressing the at-riskness of young boys. And
Thank you.
the problem is bigger than the resources.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Thank you so much to all of our wonderful, amazing panelists. I know many of you probably still have questions and comments. If you see in my name, feel free to reach out to the 2gf2@gmail.com if you want to reach any of us panelists. If you have any questions for anyone, any comments, please feel free to reach out to that email and it will be forwarded on to us. You know, thank you. I want to conclude, Natasha, even as we conclude and realize it takes a village in partnership to bring the change we want to see. Go ahead and put up the slide again where we want to make sure we give to the foundation who is trying to bring the village together to make a difference. Okay, so there we go. The Gareth Gwaine Forbes Foundation, $10, just $10 we're asking for or more to continue this wonderful work. So thank you so much to all of our panelists. We look forward to continued conversations. This was very rich and just the beginning of something great. Any concluding words, Natasha?
I just want to say thank you to the panelists. This was short notice and you all agreed to it. You came on and you've really just enlightened all of us, if I speak on behalf of the audience as well. And I want to say thanks to the audience. I want to give special shout out to Mrs. Westcar. Mrs. Westcar, thank you so much for joining us. And there's so many others that I see in the audience. I really, really, really appreciate the fact that you made the time to come and stay on. Mrs. Gail Little, a lot of educators. I'm seeing a lot of students on here. Jair, it's a pleasure to see you. Pathelia, there are so many on here. Thank you so very much. And finally, I'll ask Reverend Millen to just close us out in prayer.
Let's pray. Thank you, Heavenly Father, for once again you have shown your awesomeness by demonstrating to us that each of us have been created for greatness. The way each panelist, the way each participant has engaged in this webinar is another testimony to your awesomeness. May we find true value in honoring and appreciating and respecting each other so that we might be the little candle in our corner of the world, lighting our area and shining the beam to those who need to see the light so that at least they can follow in our footsteps. May the work of GGFF continue to grow from strength to strength, and may all those who come behind us find us faithful for your awesome name's sake. Amen.
Amen. Thank you to everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you, and God bless you.
Blessings to you all.
Bye.
Bye.